Puddle Lane. The Wideawake mice go to market. Candletown. Can you find Puddle Lane? The Wideawake mice go to market. One day Geeta went out into Puddle Lane. The sun was shining and it was very hot. Geeta tied a red handkerchief over her head and ran up to the magician's house. Geeta ran up Puddle Lane to the magician's house. As Geeta got to the gate that led into the garden, she saw a little mouse sitting on the wall in the sunshine. The little mouse was wearing a long skirt, a blouse, and a hat. Geeta didn't know it, but the little mouse was Aunt Jane. At that moment, a puff of wind blew Geeta's handkerchief off, but Geeta was so surprised to see the little mouse that she didn't notice. Aunt Jane saw her and disappeared over the wall. Geeta ran back down the lane to tell Harry. Geeta saw a little mouse on the wall. But before she found Harry, Geeta met Mrs. Pitterpatter. "Oh, Mrs. Pitterpatter," cried Geeta, "there's a mouse on the garden wall, and the mouse is wearing a skirt and a hat." "Don't tell such stories, Geeta," said Mrs. Pitterpatter. "Mice don't wear hats." "This one does," said Geeta. "Geeta, you mustn't tell stories," said Mrs. Pitterpatter. She shook her finger at Geeta and went off up the lane. Geeta went to find Harry. "Do not disturb." Geeta and Mrs. Pitterpatter. Aunt Jane ran back to the big hole under the hollow tree. On her way, she saw Geeta's red handkerchief, which the wind had blown into the garden. She went down into the hole and found the other mice all talking together. Aunt Jane ran back to the big hole under the tree. Uncle Maximus was talking louder than any of the others. "I'm hungry," said Uncle Maximus. "I'm very hungry." "We're all hungry," said Grandfather Mouse. "It's market day tomorrow," said Chestnut. "I always go to the market on market day. You can find food there." "Then we'll all go to the market," said Grandfather Mouse. "I'm hungry," said Uncle Maximus. "I'm very hungry." "We will all go to the market," said Grandfather Mouse. "We can't all go to the market," said Chestnut. "Tom Cat will be there. Tom Cat is hungry too, you know. If we all go to market, Tom Cat would be sure to catch one of us." That made everyone shiver. I'm not very well," said Uncle Maximus. "I think I'll stay at home. You can bring something back for me to eat." "We can't all go to market," said Chestnut. "Tom Cat will be there." "I'll go to market tomorrow," said Chestnut. "Jeremy and Miranda can come with me. They can run the fastest. The rest of you had better stay at home. We'll bring food back with us." Grandfather Mouse wanted to go too, but Chestnut said that he was much too slow, and Grandmother Mouse said that he had a cold. "I will go to market," said Chestnut. "Jeremy and Miranda can come with me." Aunt Jane said nothing. She went back to the garden. She found Geeta's handkerchief and poured it into the hole. Then she cut it up and made 4 little red sacks. "What are they for?" asked Chestnut. "To take to market," said Aunt Jane. "But there are 4 of them," said Chestnut. "I'm going to market too," said Aunt Jane. And she said it so firmly that Chestnut didn't say any more. Aunt Jane made 4 sacks. "I'm going to market too," she said. The next morning, before it was light, the 4 little mice went down Puddle Lane. Each little mouse had a little red sack. They were all going to market. The 4 little mice went down Puddle Lane. They were all going to market. As they came to the end of Puddle Lane, they saw the big dog. He was fast asleep. Shh, whispered Chestnut. Don't wake him. They tiptoed past. The dog's nose twitched. He dreamt about mice, but he didn't wake up. They saw the big dog. He was fast asleep. It was just getting light when they came to the market building. The 4 little mice ran up a post. They hid in the roof and waited. The 4 little mice ran up a post. They hid in the roof. They hadn't long to wait. Soon they heard people in the market below. The 4 little mice looked down. The people were setting up tables. There were bowls of nuts and big round cheeses. There were cakes and biscuits and loaves of bread. I'm hungry, said Jeremy. I'm very hungry. The 4 little mice looked down. They saw nuts and cheeses. Jeremy said, I'm hungry. I'm very hungry. Wait until the market is full of people, said Chestnut. Then they won't see us. They'll be too busy shopping. As soon as the people came into the market, the little mice ran down the post. Nobody noticed them. They ran about the floor looking for food. The little mice ran down the post. They began to eat. They ate cheese and nuts. They ate cake and biscuits. People were very careless and dropped all kinds of things on the floor. When they couldn't eat any more, the 4 little mice filled the red sacks with food. The sacks were soon full. They ate cheese and nuts. They filled the sacks. The sacks were soon full. We'll go home now, said Aunt Jane. At that moment, Chestnut saw Mrs. Pitterpatter. Mrs. Pitterpatter had come to market, and her shopping basket was full. She put down her basket while she took out her purse to pay for a cheese. Chestnut saw Mrs. Pitterpatter. Mrs. Pitterpatter put down her basket. Quick, said Chestnut, hide in the basket. We'll get a ride home. That will be much safer than running across the square. As quickly as they could, all the mice picked up their sacks and hid in Mrs. Pitterpatter's basket. Mrs. Pitterpatter put away her purse. She picked up her basket and set off for Puddle Lane. The mice hid in Mrs. Pitterpatter's basket. Mrs. Pitterpatter came to her house in Puddle Lane. She put down the basket and took out her key. Now we must run, said Chestnut. Wait until I see if it's safe, said Aunt Jane, and she ran out onto the handle of the basket. Mrs. Pitterpatter put down the basket. Aunt Jane ran out. Mrs. Pitter-Patter bent down to pick up a basket. She saw Aunt Jane sitting on the handle. "Help!" cried Mrs. Pitter-Patter. "Help! Help!" She ran into the house. She left the basket in Puddle Lane. Miranda and Jeremy, Aunt Jane and Chestnut all scrambled out and ran off up the lane. Mrs. Pitter-Patter saw Aunt Jane. She ran into the house. She left the basket in Puddle Lane. There was a great feast that night in the hole under the tree. Aunt Jane and Chestnut, Miranda and Jeremy were so full that they couldn't eat very much, but they all had a wonderful time. As for Mrs. Pitter-Patter, she never again told Gita that she was telling stories.